Continuing on in the laws of Rosh Hashanah, Siman Tovkov Pei Hey, Siman 585, Seder Tekiyas Meyushov, Uva Yodav's Ifim. This is the Seder, the order of the Tekiyas, the blowing of the Shofar, for which we sit, and there's going to be 11 Ifim. So now we're really getting into the meat, so to say, of the halachas of Rosh Hashanah, which is Shofar. Shofar is the thing probably most associated with Rosh Hashanah, and we're going to have now a lot of halachas. In fact, the vast majority of the rest of Hilchas Rosh Hashanah is going to cover aspects of Shofar blowing. And so just a brief introduction to it, so we understand, during the davening on Rosh Hashanah day, both day 1 and day 2, we have 2 sets of Tekiyah Shofar, 2 sets of blowing the Shofar. We have one that's going to be right after Kriyas HaTorah, before Musaf, and then we have a second one that's during Musaf. And there, we blow the Shofar during the Shemoneh Esrei, and at the very minimum, in the Chazin's repetition of the Shemoneh Esrei, but then by Hasidim and anyone who davens Nusach Sfard, also in the silent Shemoneh Esrei. So the first Shofar blowing we're going to talk about is the first set, the one that goes before Musaf, the one that's right after Kriyas HaTorah. And this Shofar blowing is called Tekiyas Meyushov, the set of Shofar blowings when you can sit down, versus the one during Musaf is the Mu'umad, when you're supposed to stand up, because it's during Shemoneh Esrei. Now, you're going to say practically, I've been in shul, we stand up for both, correct, and we'll see that later on, but just so we're aware, throughout these halachas, this first set before Musaf is going to be called the Tekiyas Meyushov, the Tekiyas by which you can sit. So just keep that in mind, so you don't get confused by the terminology. So the Alter Rebbe is going to open up with a brief introduction about the halachas in general, and then we're going to get more specifically into the brachas and how we actually blow shofar for that first set of shofar blowing. So let's start. Aleph. Sarech litkaya mu'umad. The shofar must be blown while standing, referring to the person who blows it, not to the kehillah, which again, we're going to see, can be sitting for that first set of shofar blowing. And there's a pasuk, Shenemar Yom T'ruah Yeh Lachem. So it shall be a day of sounding the shofar of T'ruah for them. And you're going to say, well, this pasuk has nothing to do with standing. What are you talking about? It just says that it has to be a day of shofar blowing. But you'll notice the word lachem, right? That it should be for you lachem. And now, hu aimer usfartem lachem. And where else do we see the words lachem in the pasuk about counting sfiras aimer? Usfartem lachem, same word. Ma lachem ha'omer sham mu'umad k'moshe yispar b'siman tav pei tes avkan mu'umad. Now, by Sfiras HaOmer, you have to stand up when you say it. And that's explained in Siman 489. And now, just like the word lachem is used there, it's also used in the pasuk about blowing shofar. So just like you have to stand by Sfiras HaOmer, you have to stand also by Tekiyah Shofar. Now, it's hard to understand just because the word lachem, that's what we connect. You and I can't go out and make up Torah laws and halachas based on these one-word similarities. But the Chachamim can. And they have a Messiah and they have a tradition. So that's why here we know the word lachem refers to standing in both. And therefore we stand by Sfiras HaOmer and we stand when we blow the shofar. Ulefichach, therefore, lo yismach al shum davar be'inyan she'im yinatel oisei davar shesamach alav hayadnaifel. Ein ze she'ein zoi amida ela smicha. So since we have to stand, we have to know there's a rule with standing. And standing means standing. It doesn't mean leaning. And what does leaning mean? Leaning means that if you're leaning on something, that if it's moved away, you're going to fall. That's not standing, that's leaning. And therefore, you can't lean on stuff, but you have to be standing up. Nonetheless, now what if, by accident, the person sounding shofar, whoops, they were sitting down. After the fact, you fulfill the obligation. Yatsa. You're not going to have to re-blow the shofar standing up. And the reason is because the whole idea of standing and the laws associated with standing are considered rabbinic ordinances, explained in other places in Shulchan Aruch, and therefore you're not going to have to blow shofar again just because you weren't standing. Although again, to begin with, the person blowing shofar has to stand. Now, what about those listening, the congregation? Like we said before, now in Beis, Hashoimim hatekiyas afal pi shedayin lo yatsu yidei chavoisan, afal pi chein einan tzrichim lamoid. the people listening are allowed to sit. Even if they're doing this for the mitzvah shofar, they're not just listening to it for fun or for extra, no, they're doing the mitzvah, they could sit down for the shofar blowing. And that's why it's called Tekiyas Miyushav, the Tekiyas by which you can sit down. Now, where do we read the shofar? Gimel. Where do we blow the shofar? Gimel. Naigim litzkaya ala bima. The person blowing the shofar, the Baal Tekiyah, should stand at the bima. B'ma'kaim shekari, in the place where you read the Torah. Why? Because obviously we want to make a connection between Torah reading and shofar. Because as we learn in Parshas Yisro, when the Torah was given, how it was given? With shofar blowing. So therefore it makes sense that we should blow the shofar dafka at the place where the Torah is read. Who should be the Baal Tekiyah? Who should blow shofar? Someone who's tzaddik, who's righteous, v'hagun, someone who's honorable. The main thing is that they'll make a machlekes. There shouldn't be fighting about it. There shouldn't be, this guy thinks he's a tzaddik. You don't know what it shouldn't be like that. It should be whether it needs to be a vote, whether it's decided by the rabbi. If a shul is unlucky enough to have a board, the board decides. Whatever it is, there shouldn't be a machlekes. So now we're going to jump into the bracha. And we know the general rule. We have a mitzvah, we make a bracha beforehand. So what's the bracha we're going to make by shofar? Dalid, Koidem sheyiska yivardech mu'umad. We're going to say a bracha standing. And the bracha is Asher Kidishan Mitzvah Sabetivanu Lishmaya Kol Shofar. It has the same beginning of any other mitzvah bracha, and the ending is Lishmaya Kol Shofar, to hear the sounds of the shofar. V'lo Yaimar B'Kol Shofar. It doesn't say Lishmaya B'Kol Shofar, to listen, to the sounds of the shofar. Why? The mashma with sayis with kol shofar, because if you're saying I'm listening, almost like in the sounds of the shofar, it's like you're heeding what the shofar says, like it's giving you an instruction. But the main thing is to hear the sound of it, so that grammar wouldn't be correct. That's why we say lishma kol shofar. Now, why don't we say to blow the shofar instead of to listen to it? Right? It's tekiyah shofar, blow the shofar. The answer is Lafisha Tekiyah Eino Ikar Mitzvah Elo Shmias Kol Shofar Hu Ikar Mitzvah. Because the main point is not about the blowing the shofar, it's hearing the shofar. So if you're in a shul and you're the one listening to it, you're not missing out. Just because someone else is doing the actual Tekiyah blowing, it's not like they're getting greater part of the mitzvah. No, the main point is to hear it. Shaharei Tekiyah V'Oshama Kol Shofar Lo Yatsa. And in fact, the blowing of the shofar doesn't give you the mitzvah, doesn't fulfill your obligation. And we're going to actually learn this later on. Let's give a crazy example. Someone's blowing shofar and the headphones on, they can't hear it. They don't get the mitzvah. But the people who are in the kehillah, in the congregation listening, they do get the mitzvah. Now what if someone by mistake, they've learned these halachas so well, so now they're thinking in this way, and they get up to the shofar, and instead of saying Lishmaya Kol Shofar, they say Tekiyah Shofar. After the fact, they fulfilled the obligation, they don't have to repeat the bracha. Now there's another bracha we're going to make. Hey, v'achar bracha zay yivarech shechianu. Now after this first bracha, we're going to say shechianu. Why lefi shehi mitzvah haba mizman guzman? This is not a mitzvah you're doing every single day. Obviously, it's special. So we're going to make a shechianu bracha. Now who's going to say these two brachas? If you're blowing the shofar, so to say, for yourself, or if you're in shul and you haven't heard shofar yet, so you're included in the person who needs to fulfill the obligation. Or, in modern terms, we would say if you're going on mitzvahim, if you're doing the mitzvah for someone else. But there's a nuance. When do we say this? Only when the person you're blowing for doesn't know how to say the bracha, though. But if he doesn't know how to say the bracha, he should say the bracha for himself. And the person ideally should make his own bracha, because why? He should be saying it instead of hearing the bracha from someone who already fulfilled the obligation. It's better that he does it himself, if he can. So again, practically, the person who's leading the Shofar Blowing, doing the Shofar Blowing in Shul, says both brachas, the mitzvah bracha and the shechianu bracha. If you're on Mivtzayim, you can absolutely say both brachas for another man that you're doing this for, that you're blowing shofar for. However, if you've already fulfilled your obligation, in other words, you already said the bracha once, or you heard the bracha and you did the mitzvah, and the other person knows how to say the bracha, then by all means they really should be saying the bracha for themselves. So now what's the actual shofar blowing? Vav, v'achar she'beirach shtei brachas, after you've said these two brachas, elu, these ones, yitaka, we're going to blow the following. Tashrat gimel pa'amim, v'tashat gimel pa'amim, v'tardat gimel pa'amim. Kamoi she'yisbar b'siman tovkov tzadik ayin sham. We're going to blow 3 sets, each 3 times. So let's give a little explanation. We're going to explain this at length in later Simanim, so don't worry about it. I'm just giving a brief introduction now. But there's different sounds we can make with the shofar. There's a tekiya, a long sound, and then there's short sounds. So there's a machlekes, we'll see later on, whether the in-between sound is supposed to be shvarim, which is 3 medium sounds, 2, 2, 2, or if it's a bunch of short sounds, what we call trua, do, 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 or it's both together. Do, 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 do. So since we don't know which is the correct, we do a combination. We blow the tekiyas with each of them. So we'll do a tekiya with shvarim terua, and then another tekiya. Then we'll do a tekiya with a shvarim tekiya, and then we'll do a tekiya with a terua tekiya. And so we abbreviate this tashrat, tekiya shvarim terua tekiya, tashat, tekiya shvarim tekiya, or tarat, tekiya terua tekiya. And each of those has to be done 3 times because that's the minimum obligation. And since we don't know which, we do each of them 3 times. So that's the full set of shofar blowings. And you'll recall, if you've been in shul, hopefully for shofar blowing, that's what we do at that shofar blowing right after Kriyas Torah, the one before Musaf. Now, now what if you're not sure if you heard the shofar blowing on day 1? Now, obviously, you're going to remember if you heard it all, but maybe it wasn't correct. Maybe you don't know if it was done correctly. Maybe you don't know if you missed some of the sounds. In other words, there's a suffix about it on day 1. Then what happens? You have to hear the shofar again. Why? Because this is a deraisa. This is from the Torah here in the shofar. So if you have a question, a suffix deraisa, l'chumra, we're going to be strict. You got to hear it again. Alvo, lo yavarek, shesafek brachos v'hakel. But now, what if you don't remember whether you don't say the bracha, but I think the implication of the Alter Rebbe here is you, again, the same thing as above, you don't know if you heard the shofar correctly. The question is, are you going to say the bracha again? Because you would say, hey, I didn't hear it. The answer is no, because safek bracha hakel, if you have a question about whether you need to make a bracha or not, or there's any type of question involved, we don't repeat the bracha again. And therefore, you're just going to hear the shofar again. Now, what if it's on the second day, you don't know if you heard it correctly? Then, you don't need to repeat it. Why? The suffix divrei seifrim hakel, because if we have a question, a suffix, on the rabbinic question, in this case, second day shofar, then we're hakel, then we are lenient. Tayiv v'skoya b'tzad yamin shopiv, im efshar, loy b'chach, mishum shenemar v'asatan oimed al yamino v'atakia mar bebes hasatan. If possible, if you're able to, you should put the shofar, when you blow it, on the right side of your mouth. Why? Because there's a pasuk that says that Satan stands on the right. And since the shofar is able to confuse or confound the Satan, you do it on the right side, the side that the Satan, so to say, stands on. Another custom about how to blow the shofar, Zayin, v'toiv sheyamid peh ha-shofar l'mayla v'lo yaten l'tzdadin. It's good that if you hold the shofar, that the, so to say, the hole of it, the place the sound comes out of, is pointing upwards and not stadin. It's not kind of like to the side. Shinemar is a pasuk that says, Al Elohim b'trua v'gaimer, that Hashem ascends, goes up through the trua. Ascends implies that it should be vertical, it should be going up. So now in Ches, we're actually going to have a question about someone's trying to blow shofar. You have a Baal Tekeya, but sometimes it's hard to blow shofar. So what happens if the person blowing it can't do the shofar blowing? It can't even do one of them. What are we going to do? Both in terms of the actual shofar blowing and then the brachas itself, most importantly here. Ches. Im hiskal itkaya v'lo yachal l'shalim kel hashloishim tekiyas. Now, what if someone starts to blow, but they can't do the full 30? Remember, the 30 is, again, like we said above, is the set that you have to blow minimum. They can't do it. They get up there, doesn't work. Then what happens? Yidka achar tachtav. So you have to bring in another person. It is what it is. The im gam hasheni eno yachal l'hashlim yashlim achar tachtav. So what if the second person can't finish it? Then you get someone else. It could be 100 people down until you get through the entire set of tekiyas. Now each one does not make a new bracha because they are all exempted. They all heard that first bracha when person number one presumably made the brachas. Now what if the first person made the brachas and couldn't get one sound out? Still, none of the other people make another bracha. Because it was not a bracha in vain. Why? Because like we said above, what is the whole purpose of the bracha? It's not the sounding. It's that we should hear the shofar. And indeed, everyone is going to. So there's no loss at his bracha. Im kain hataykin achraynim v'chol kahal sheshamu berchasa einam tzrichim oiduvarech. That's why these other people who are going to blow shofar, who are presumably part of the kahil, part of the congregation when they heard the bracha, they don't have to recite it again because indeed they're going to fulfill their mitzvah bracha of hearing the shofar. So it was not a bracha in vain and it does not need to be repeated. Now, although im ba'it kaya tachtav mishloi shama berchasa tzarich levarek kodem sheisaka shaharei hu lo yatsa berchas harishen. Now, what if the first person didn't hear the bracha? Say he was outside the shul, he came in, he's having trouble, and he's going to go help. He never heard the bracha. He is going to have to make a new bracha. Again, why? He never heard the bracha. Tes. But when does this apply? There's a nuance to this. Only if the person that's going up, we're talking about the person who was outside, didn't hear the bracha, has to repeat the bracha, but that's only if he didn't already fulfill his mitzvah of hearing shofar. He didn't fulfill his chiyuv. Avo im kvar yatsa yidei chavasai, sheshama kvar kol tekiyas bebeis hakneses acheres. But what if he was davening in another shul and he heard all the tekiyas? He's done and he's walking by. They say, "Hey, can you blow shofar? We have trouble." Then einat tzarech levarech koydem sheisaka. He doesn't need to make a bracha again because what's the bracha on? It's on the hearing. It's not on the blowing, and he already heard. And again, the people who need to have the bracha for hearing, which is the kehillah there, they already heard the bracha, so they're good. Now, a few little other nuances to Tekiyah Shofar. Yud, Noigin, Shemis Palel, Shachris, Makri, Seder, Tekiyas, Livnei, HaTekeya, Miwa, B'miwa, Kadeshlo, Yata, V'Tekiyaso. This short Siman is sif is very interesting. It says that the person who leads davening for Shachris, the Chazan there, they should call out word by word each of the notes, each of the tekiyas that the Baal Tekeya has to blow. They should call tekiya, then he does tekiya. Shvar Teruah, then he does Shvar Teruah, etc. He should do it word by word. And the Rebbe here says that this is a minhag yafa. This is a nice minhag, that it should be done. But obviously anyone who's been to a Lubavitch shul knows this is practically not our custom. We don't want anyone to interrupt. So this person who calls out a makri in our shuls doesn't actually call it. They just simply point word by word by word. Now, one of the benefits of pointing is that they can actually point for how long each individual note has to be. And we'll see later on, that's a benefit because there's certain lengths the different notes, the different tekiyas have to be. Yud Aleph, finally. And you'll notice this is in parentheses, which I'll explain. Yodav Asar Litel Schar Liskoya Shofar B'Rosh Hashanah Afilu Secharuhu Me'erev Yom Tov. It's forbidden to accept payment for being the one who blows the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, even if you got your payment Erev Yom Tov. Lefi Shehu Naitel Schar Yom Tov. Because why? You can't receive wage, you can't receive payment for something you do on Yom Tov. V'asar Mitam Shen Yizbar B'Siman Shin Vav Ayin Sham. And it's forbidden rabbinically because the reasons given previously in Shulchan Aruch. The Im Natal. Now, what if you do get payment? You will never see a bracha from that money. Wow, that's a pretty strong words from the Alter Rebbe. Now you'll notice again, if you're looking at the Shulchan Aruch as we're doing this last sif is in parentheses. Why is it in parentheses? So the Rebbe actually brings in Igros Kodesh that when the Alter Rebbe puts an entire section in parentheses, it's because he wanted to reconsider it later on maybe. And so there's a lot of machlokes about this because the Alter Rebbe does point out there's a machlokes about getting payment for work that you do on Yom Tov if it's for a mitzvah. So since this is a mitzvah, the question is there room to be lenient? Can you hire the person, for example, for a more continuous job that's not just on Yom Tov? So it's in parentheses because the Alter Rebbe may not have felt 100% that this is the way he wanted to paskin. So that brings us to the end of the Siman. So just quickly to review it, we went over the laws of Tekiyas, Shofar, Miyushav, the Tekiyas that we can sit down for. This is the Tekiyas that are before, most of the ones after Kriyas Torah. And we explained that the whole idea of the Baal Tekeya, the person blowing and having to stand, comes from the word lachem in the pasuk, Yem Tshua lachem, which is the same as Svartem lachem. So we talked about that, but we also said that the Kehillah congregation can in theory sit, although practically everyone stands for both Tekiyah Shofars. We said that we should blow shofar from where the Torah is read, from the bima. We spoke about the brachas. The correct bracha is Lishmaya Kol Shofar, but if someone accidentally said Litkaya b'Shofar or Tekiyah Shofar, b'diavad after the fact, it's okay. We also talked about how you have to say Shechianu, and that's when you're doing the brachas, you should say an initial bracha and the Shechianu, both when you're doing it for yourself and when you're on Mivtzayim. But if you've already heard shofar and the person you're blowing for knows how to make the brachas, then better they should do it. We went over the soundings of the shofar, that we have 3 sets each of Tashrat times 3, Tashat times 3, and then Tarat times 3. And if you have a suffix, if you heard the correct notes, or the correct tekiyas on day 1, you got to repeat it all without a bracha. Day 2, you don't need to repeat it at all because it's the Rabbanan. We gave 2 little types, 2 good things from blowing shofar. One type is to do it from the right side of the mouth, and the other is it's type that it should be pointed upward. We also explained that if the people blowing shofar, the Baal Tekeya, can't finish it, you just get another person and another until you get all the notes in, and they do not have to repeat the brachas as long as they all heard the brachas already previously, or if they already fulfilled their obligation. The one exception is if someone A did not fulfill their obligation and B was not in shul when the bracha was made, they're going to need to repeat the bracha before they help out with blowing shofar. We also said that there is a minhag that the Sheikh Tzibur, the Chazan for Shacharis, calls out the Tekiyah, Shvarim, the notes that are going to be sounded by the Baal Tekeya, but our minhag is that they just simply point, they don't talk. And then finally we had this questionable halacha from the Alter Rebbe about that you should not be paying the person who blows shofar.